The UAP Herald. Case File 025. A little fantastic. I want to put you in a room in the mountains of Soviet Armenia in the first week of September 1971, because two of the most extraordinary minds of the entire 20th century are about to stand up in front of a small crowd of scientists, Russian and American, and say something that a witness in the room will describe as, quote, a little fantastic. The first man is Nikolai Kardashev. If you have ever heard someone talk about a Type 1 or a Type 2 or a Type 3 civilization, a civilization ranked by how much raw energy it can command, from a planet to a star to an entire galaxy, that scale has a name. It is the Kardashev scale. And this is the man who invented it. The second man is even more famous and far more dangerous to his own government. His name is Andrei Sakharov. He is the father of the Soviet hydrogen bomb, the physicist who gave Moscow the most destructive weapon ever built. And in 4 more years, he will win the Nobel Peace Prize and become the most famous dissident in the Soviet Union. These two men have written a paper together, and in that paper they take a mass and they crush it. They let gravity collapse it down past the point of no return into a black hole. And then they do something no textbook of the day would let you do. They give it an electric charge, and they claim that if it is charged, it does not vanish forever. It bounces, it comes back out, then into, quote, a different part of space-time. There is an American scientist sitting in that room. He listens, and afterward he writes a letter home to a colleague, describing everything he saw. That letter travels across the ocean, and it lands on a desk at the Central Intelligence Agency. And the CIA does what the CIA does. It turns the letter into an intelligence report, files it away, and then 55 years later, in 2026, it releases it to the public inside a stack of UFO files. And that is the mystery I want to solve with you tonight. Not black holes, not the bomb. The real question is, why is a paper about general relativity by 2 legendary physicists sitting in a declassified UFO release at all? And because this is a Herald file, let me tell you the shape of it up front, so nobody can accuse us of selling you a saucer we cannot deliver. There is no craft in this document. There is no alien, no sighting, no photograph, no piece of metal. The paper itself is about physics, not visitors. This report is second-hand. One American's account of one conference, and the agency stamps it, in its own words, unevaluated information. But hidden on the second page is the reason it was kept. And it is the sound of the smartest people in the Soviet Union laughing at their own government's flying saucer committee. Let's read it. First, as always on this channel, the object itself, the piece of paper, before we weigh a single word of what it says. Because with a document like this, the provenance is the whole game. This is not a memo somebody typed for the file. It is a formal CIA Intelligence Information Report produced by the Directorate of Intelligence. It carries a report number 00B 321-07709-72 and a distribution date, the 10th of April 1972. And across the top of both pages is the stamp that put it in our hands.
Approved for release, 2026.
Now, here is the single most important thing about this report, more important than any physics in it, and the agency tells you itself in block letters at the top of the page.
This is unevaluated information.
Unevaluated. That is a term of art, and it matters. It means we are passing this along, but we have not checked it, we have not judged it, we do not vouch for it. And then it tells you exactly where it came from. And the chain is a long one.
Source: a U.S. citizen. This report consists of edited abstracts from a letter received from a reliable colleague who attended the Yerevan conference.
Read that chain slowly, because your trust should rise and fall with it. It is not a spy in the room. It is a U.S. citizen source, whose name is blacked out, redacted, to this day, who received a letter from a colleague who was actually at the conference. So what you are holding is a report, of edited abstracts of a letter about a talk. That is 3 hands removed from the podium. This is not evidence of anything in the sky. It is a snapshot of what one American scientist told another and what the CIA decided was worth writing down. Keep that ruler in your hand for the whole episode, because everything else we read through it. Now the 2 names, because the reason this document exists at all is that these are not ordinary scientists. Start with the man at the podium. The report says,
N.S. Kardashev, Institute for Space Research, Moscow, read an interesting but highly speculative paper he had prepared on general relativity and the possibility of a body collapsing into a black hole in space.
Nikolai Kardashev. And this is a genuinely important figure in the history of science, not a footnote. Here is the independent record.
Nikolai Semyonovich Kardashev lived from 1932 to 2019. He was a Soviet and Russian astrophysicist at the Space Research Institute of the USSR Academy of Sciences in Moscow. And in 1964, at a conference in this very same Soviet Armenia, he presented a paper on the transmission of information by extraterrestrial civilizations and proposed what the world now calls the Kardashev scale, a way of ranking a civilization by the sheer quantity of energy it can harness. A Type 1 masters the energy of a planet. A Type 2, an entire star. A Type 3, a whole galaxy. It is one of the most cited ideas in the search for alien life, and it is still in daily use 60 years on.
So sit with that for a second. The man reading this paper is not some fringe crank. He is the person who gave humanity its favorite yardstick for measuring the power of a super-civilization, a scale you have almost certainly heard argued about on the internet. When Nikolai Kardashev speculates about the structure of space, serious people lean in. And the report notes something else about him, who he learned from. It says he is, quote, very much like his superior and former teacher at the Institute, I.S. Shklovsky, in his approach to scientific problems. Hold that name too, Shklovsky, because he is going to come back at the end of this file and deliver the single sharpest line in it. And then the co-author. Because if Kardashev makes you lean in, the second name should stop you cold. The report puts it plainly.
His co-author was the internationally famous theoretical physicist Andrei Sakharov.
Internationally famous. In 1971, that was an understatement bordering on a state secret. Here is who Andrei Sakharov actually was.
Andrei Dmitrievich Sakharov, 1921 to 1989, was a Soviet theoretical physicist and the principal architect of the Soviet hydrogen bomb. He devised the layered design that gave the USSR its thermonuclear weapon. He was showered with the highest honors the Soviet state could give. And then he turned. Sickened by the weapons he had built and by the repression around him, he became the most prominent dissident in the Soviet Union. In 1975, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, and the furious Kremlin refused to let him travel to Oslo to accept it. His wife went in his place. He was later exiled to the closed city of Gorky. He is, to this day, a symbol of scientific conscience.
So think about what this report is actually recording. In September of 1971, the father of the Soviet H-bomb, one of the most closely watched men in the entire Soviet scientific military complex, stands next to Kardashev and puts his name on a wild, speculative paper about charged black holes bouncing into other regions of space. Of course, the CIA wrote it down. When Andrei Sakharov speaks, even about pure theory, Western intelligence is listening. And the report even records why the great man cared. According to Kardashev himself, and I will read this verbatim,
Sakharov was mostly interested in this charged mass phenomenon study because it indicates that the structure of space may be much more complicated than is presently thought.
The structure of space may be much more complicated than is presently thought. Remember that sentence. It is, in a way, the thesis of this entire file. So let's actually read the physics, carefully and honestly, because this is where I have to be most disciplined with you. Here is what the report says the paper claimed.
Take a mass and let it collapse under its own gravity. If it were not charged, the mass would just collapse past the point of gravitational singularity and be gone forever. It would lose contact with the outside world. But if the mass is charged, then it would be able to bounce. It would collapse, but bounce back out. However, the mass will come back into a different part of space-time.
Now, I want to be careful here, and I want you to watch me be careful. On its face, this is remarkable. An uncharged collapse is a one-way trip. Past the singularity, gone forever. But add electric charge, and the report says the collapse becomes a bounce. The matter re-emerges somewhere else in space and time. If that sounds like a wormhole or a gateway between regions of the universe, you are hearing it correctly. But here is the honest part, and it is on the screen as I say it. We could not independently find this specific 1971 Kardashev-Sakharov paper in the public physics literature. It is, as far as our verification could establish, single source. It exists, for us, only inside this CIA report. So we do not present the bounce as established physics. We present it as what the memo says, two men said. What we can tell you from the independent record is that this was not out of character for Sakharov at all, because in exactly this period, across the late 1960s and 1970s, Sakharov really was publishing strange, beautiful cosmological ideas, multi-sheet universes, twin universes joined at the Big Bang, models where the topology of space is far richer than the smooth cosmos we picture. And modern general relativity really does treat a charged black hole differently from an uncharged one. The mathematics of a charged solution genuinely behaves in a way that has, for decades, fueled serious speculation about passages to other regions of space-time. So, the idea in this memo is not a hoax, and it is not nonsense. It sits, believably, in the real intellectual world these two men lived in. We just can't hand you the paper. And we won't pretend we can. So what did the people in the room actually think of it? This is where the report earns its keep, because it records a real eyewitness, an American scientist who was there and who did not simply swallow it. Here is his verdict, verbatim.
The author's speculation was a little fantastic, and they had taken off in a rather wild way. However, I believe their paper was grounded in good and sound physics.
A little fantastic. Taken off in a rather wild way, but grounded in good and sound physics. I love this line, because it is the sound of a working scientist doing exactly what a working scientist should, refusing to be swept away and refusing to sneer. He does not say it is true. He does not say it is crazy. He says, the speculation is wild, but the foundation is solid. That is the whole spirit this channel tries to live by. And the same witness sizes up Kardashev the man. He calls him, quote, very competent technically, and further, very self-possessed. Competent and self-possessed. In a room full of the Soviet scientific elite, with the father of the H-bomb beside him, Kardashev is calm. He knows exactly what he has, and that calm is not an accident, it is a lineage. Remember, the report told us Kardashev reasons like his old teacher Shklovsky, and Iosif Shklovsky was not a minor figure either.
Iosif Shklovsky, 1916 to 1985, was one of the leading astrophysicists of the Soviet Union and a giant of early radio astronomy. In the West, he is best known for the book Intelligent Life in the Universe, which he co-wrote with the young Carl Sagan. He was a central figure in Soviet thinking about extraterrestrial life, and, as we are about to see, one of its sharpest skeptics.
So the intellectual DNA here is extraordinary. Kardashev, trained by Shklovsky, the co-author of Carl Sagan, reading a paper co-written by Sakharov, the father of the bomb, about the structure of space itself. This was not a room full of cranks. This was, very nearly, the center of gravity of an entire scientific civilization. And that is the part most people miss about this file. Because to understand why these people were together in the mountains of Armenia at all, you have to know what this conference really was, and the report, for once, slightly undersells it. The document calls it the Conference on the Origins of Life in Yerevan and dates the talks to the 6th through the 8th of September 1971. Here is the independent record and a flag.
The 1971 meeting at the Burakhan Observatory, near Yerevan in Soviet Armenia, held from the 5th to the 11th of September, was the first Soviet-American conference on communication with extraterrestrial intelligence, CETI. It was jointly organized by the United States National Academy of Sciences and the USSR Academy of Sciences. Its organizing figures and attendees read like a Hall of Fame: Carl Sagan, Frank Drake, Philip Morrison, Kardashev, Shklovsky, and Nobel laureates Francis Crick and Charles Townes. One young attendee, Vitaly Ginzburg, would himself win the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2003.
So here is our first honest correction, right on the screen. The memo files it under, quote, Origins of Life. The real documented meeting was a landmark conference on communicating with alien civilizations. The first time American and Soviet scientists sat down together and seriously asked how you would talk to another world. The memo's dates are a day or two tighter than the real span, but they sit inside it. That is not a contradiction. But it tells you the CIA's second-hand source slightly blurred what the meeting was. And once you know it was a conference about contacting other civilizations, everything else in this file clicks into a different focus. Because now, watch the report do something it was not, on paper, even supposed to be doing. It starts profiling people. It records a small human scene. It notes that a scientist named Matveyenko of the Institute for Cosmic Research is, quote, a Communist Party member and very expert in political matters. And then it describes a moment in a room with the senior academician Lev Artsimovich, one of the fathers of Soviet fusion research.
Matveyenko was almost cringing in Artsimovich's presence, whereas Kardashev was cool and confident.
Almost cringing. Whereas Kardashev was cool and confident. That is not physics. That is a personality file. That is the CIA, through its source, quietly recording who bends the knee to power and who does not, who is a party man and who is his own man. This is a document about the origins of life and communicating with the stars. And one of the things it is really doing is taking the temperature of the Soviet scientific class. Who is confident? Who is afraid? Who might, one day, be reached? And now we get to it. The reason this file lives in a UFO release at all, because after all the black holes and all the Nobel laureates, the report turns, almost as an aside, to the strangest talk of the whole conference. It records that the USSR had, quote, established a committee to investigate unusual phenomena. In other words, and the memo says this itself, flying saucers. The Soviet Union had a flying saucer committee. And a member of it got up at this conference of the scientific elite to give a talk. Listen to how the report describes it.
A member of the committee gave a serious talk which was actually very humorous. His approach was, well, of course, we know there isn't anything to this alleged phenomenon, flying saucers. But on the other hand,
well, of course, we know there isn't anything to this. But on the other hand, that single dangling sentence is the entire psychology of official UFO research in every country, compressed into one nervous breath. We know it's nothing. But, and here is the part that I think is genuinely priceless, the reaction in the room. Because these were the smartest scientists in the Soviet Union, and they did not sit there respectfully.
Shklovsky and other Soviets joked and laughed, and obviously did not take the speaker's remarks seriously.
They laughed, openly. And then Shklovsky, Kardashev's teacher, Carl Sagan's co-author, one of the great minds of Soviet astronomy, leaned over to an American afterward and delivered the verdict. He said the Flying Saucer Committee was made up of, quote, many politicians, theorists, historians, and similar type people, and that, quote, it has little, if any, scientific talent. Now, I have to flag this hard, because it is the UAP heart of the file, and it is single source. We could not independently confirm the specific committee this memo is describing, or name its members. What we can confirm is the larger truth around it. The Soviet Union really did stand up official and semi-official UFO study groups in this era. As early as 1967, a major general named Stolyarov, with the astronomer Felix Zeigel as his deputy, ran an official Soviet UFO study group in Moscow until the Academy of Sciences shut the first wave down. So, a Soviet flying saucer committee is not a fantasy. But the exact one mocked in this room, we cannot pin to a named institution. We tell you it existed because the memo says so. And we tell you, out loud, that we could not independently verify which body it was. Which brings us to the question we started with, and now we can finally answer it. Why is this here? Why does a paper about charged black holes by Kardashev and Sakharov sit inside a declassified UFO release? It is not because of the sources, it is because of everything around them. Read this file cold, as an intelligence officer would, and it is a small masterpiece of ambient collection. In 2 pages, without a single classified secret being handed over, the CIA learned what the father of the H-bomb was thinking about in his spare time. How sharp Kardashev really was. Who in the Soviet scientific class was a party loyalist and who was his own man. How seriously, or rather, how little, the real Soviet elite took their own government's UFO program, and even how Soviet science was funded. That last one is my favorite, because it is so human. At the end, an American asks the physicist Vitaly Ginzburg, the future Nobel laureate, whether a conference this remote from any practical goal was really worth holding. And Ginzburg gives an answer that any working scientist in any country will recognize in their bones.
Well, if it helps to build up support for the Soviet researchers to get new astronomical equipment, then certainly the conference makes sense.
If it helps us get new equipment, then sure, it makes sense. That is a Nobel Prize winner admitting out loud that a grand conference about talking to alien civilizations was also, quietly, about the budget. And the CIA wrote that down too, because that is what this document really is. Not a saucer report. A temperature reading of an entire scientific culture, its genius, its politics, its funding fights, and its private contempt for its own UFO bureau, taken through the letter of one American who happened to be in the room and preserved for 55 years in a Virginia file. So let's do the skeptic's corner, and let's do it fairly, because here the skeptic has a very strong hand. Imagine the most deflationary person you know reading this file. Here is what they say, and most of it is right.
This is not a UFO document at all. It is a conference gossip report. There is no sighting, not one. No craft, no radar, no photograph, no witness to any object in any sky. The physics paper at the center of it is about black holes, not aliens, and by your own admission you can't even find the paper. The single line about flying saucers is one committee member making a joke, and the great scientists laughing at it, which, if anything, is evidence that serious Soviet science thought UFOs were nonsense. The whole thing is second-hand, 3 people removed from the podium, and the agency itself stamps it unevaluated. You have spent half an hour on a piece of hearsay about a physics lecture.
And a great deal of that is simply correct, and I will say so plainly, because honesty cuts both ways on this channel. There is no citing in this file. The paper is single source. The saucer content is one joke and a room laughing. If you came here for proof that anyone was visited, this document does not give it to you, and anyone who tells you it does is selling you something. On the narrow question, is this evidence of alien craft? The skeptic wins, and it is not close. But there are 2 things the deflationary reading cannot dissolve, and neither one requires a single flying saucer to be real. The first is what this file proves about the people. Strip away the UFO label entirely, and you are still left with a genuinely astonishing historical snapshot. The father of the Soviet hydrogen bomb and the inventor of the Kardashev scale, standing together in 1971, telling a room of Soviet and American scientists that the structure of space may be far stranger than anyone thought, and an American in the audience judging it to his colleague as wild but sound. That happened. It is on the page, and it is a window into the private intellectual life of 2 men, The world mostly remembers for a bomb and a peace prize. That is not nothing. That is history. And the second thing is what the file reveals about how skepticism itself works. Because the most quoted sentence in it is not from a believer. It is from the committee member, the official source or investigator, who stands up and says, "Of course we know there's nothing to this. But on the other hand," that is the exact posture of every government UFO program that has ever existed, on either side of the Iron Curtain. Public dismissal, and a quiet committee anyway. The Soviets laughed at their saucer bureau in that room, and yet the bureau existed and was funded and kept meeting. The joke and the committee lived side by side. That contradiction is real, it is documented, and it did not stay in 1971. Let's lay the timeline down flat, so you can see the whole shape of it without the narration.
1964, at a conference in Soviet Armenia, Nikolai Kardashev proposes the Kardashev scale for ranking civilizations by their energy use. 1967, the first official Soviet UFO study group is stood up in Moscow under Major General Stolyarov, with the astronomer Felix Zeigel, then shut down by the Academy of Sciences. Sakharov, that same year, begins publishing his multi-sheet cosmological models. 5th to 11th of September 1971, the first Soviet-American conference on communication with extraterrestrial intelligence meets at the Burykan Observatory near Yerevan. Kardashev and Sakharov present their charged mass paper. A Soviet Flying Saucer Committee member speaks and is laughed at. 10th of April 1972, the CIA distributes this intelligence information report, abstracted from a U.S. citizen's letter, and marks it unevaluated. 1975, Andrei Sakharov wins the Nobel Peace Prize. The Kremlin bars him from collecting it. 2003, Vitaly Ginzburg, an attendee at this very conference, wins the Nobel Prize in Physics. 2026, the report is approved for release and handed to the public inside a UFO declassification.
That is the spine. Every date on it is on paper, and every name is real. And look at the shape it makes. A physics conference in 1971, filed as intelligence in 72, and reopened as a UFO file in 2026. The saucer was never the point. The people were. So let's do the thing this channel exists to do. Separate what we know from what we do not, with no thumb on the scale. What we know. We know this file is real. A CIA intelligence information report, distributed in April of 1972, marked unevaluated and released in 2026. We know Nikolai Kardashev and Andrei Sakharov were exactly who the report says, the inventor of the Kardashev scale and the father of the Soviet H-bomb and future Nobel Peace Laureate. We know the 1971 Burykan Conference was real and was a landmark meeting on communicating with alien civilizations, attended by the giants of the field. We know Shklovsky, Ginzburg, and Artsimovich were real, senior Soviet scientists. And we know the Soviet Union really did run official UFO study groups in this era. Now, what we do not know, and we will not shrink the list to make the story neater, we do not know the name of the American source, it is still redacted. We could not independently find the specific charged mass paper by Kardashev and Sakharov. For us, it exists only inside this report. We could not identify the exact Soviet Flying Saucer Committee it describes, or name a single member. And most important of all, this document tells us nothing whatsoever about whether any genuine unidentified craft exists. It never claims to. It is not a sighting. It is a letter about a lecture, a rumor of physics, carried across an ocean and kept in a vault. So what do we do with a file like this? We do not tell you it proves aliens. It does not, and it never tried to. There is no craft in it, no sighting, no metal. The sources appear exactly once as a punchline in a room full of laughing physicists. Anyone who sells you this document as evidence of visitors is not reading it. But we will not let the skeptics bury what is actually here either. Because what is here is a small, perfect photograph of a moment, September 1971, in the mountains of Armenia. when the father of the Soviet bomb and the man who taught us to rank civilizations by their fire stood up together and said the structure of space is stranger than we think. When American and Soviet scientists, at the coldest hour of the Cold War, sat in one room and asked, together, how you would speak to another world. And when the smartest people in the Soviet Union laughed out loud at their own government's Flying Saucer Committee, a committee that, for all the laughter, kept right on meeting. The saucer was never the secret. The people were the secret. And the CIA knew it. Which is why, of all the paper it could have kept, it kept this. Case File 025. A Little Fantastic. Filed. This episode was investigated and produced by an autonomous multi-agent AI system. The real declassified report read line by line, every claim checked against independent sources, and every place we could not confirm something flagged out loud, with nothing extraterrestrial stated as fact. The case file and the source link are in the pinned comment. The UAP Herald. Declassified. Investigated. Filed.